We'll do it live.
Hello and welcome to the Secular Nation Podcast, broadcasting live from the luxurious Doubletree Hotel outside the high-tech SeaTac airport. I am your host,
We'll do it live!
Say it again.
I am your host, Tim Rann. With me is my co-host, Michael X.
Hello.
And with us, we have a celebrity panel of, on our extreme left, my
Stage left.
we have historian Richard Carrier. Next to ex-preacher Richard Haynes.
Brother Richard Haynes.
Next to me is Richard Honus. That's right. We got 3 dicks up in here.
And he's wearing a kilt also.
Yes, I am wearing a kilt. And to answer your question, the answer to your question is no or yes, depending on how you phrased it. And finally, we have Amy Monsky, our new executive director of the Atheist Alliance of America. So we are here at the Atheist Alliance of America conference in Seattle, Washington.
Beautiful, rainy, not even rainy right now, Seattle.
Yeah, it's great. Very unknown.
It's unnatural.
I love Seattle, really. This is my 3rd time coming here. Every time, it's a wonderful time, wonderful people, great things to see if we ever, get outside this hotel to see them. We are hoping to get a karaoke night going later tonight. So
which we won't be recording or releasing on podcast.
Yeah, that too.
So you're grateful for this.
Why don't we start with just having our panel sort of introduce themselves better than I could in their own words. Let's start with RC.
I'm Dr. Richard Carrier, historian, philosopher. If you want to know everything about me, it's richardcarrier.info. But I've published many books. I blog and write and speak about ancient history, origins of Christianity, history of science, and modern philosophy. Excuse me. And here at the conference, I'm going to be debating whether Jesus existed or not at all as a historical person with, I believe, a Christian opponent. I have not met or know the bio of my opponent yet, so...
Ooh, mystery.
Well, as you can see, we have a real lightweight on the panel. And next up, Brother Richard.
Hello, I'm Dr. Richard Carrier as well. At least I'm trying to become a Dr. Richard. It'll probably take me another 20 years. Yes, I'm Richard Haynes, former preacher, Brother Richard. It's a joke name that I am stuck with no matter what I do. I'll explain more on that later. I'm sure some people get sick of hearing it. Here at the convention, I'm going to be speaking on the topic of we need a bigger boat, which comes from the great Steven Spielberg movie Jaws. It should be interesting, should be fun. It's the first time I've ever given this talk. And what else do you want to know? Just all around great guy. And,
we can attest.
Yes.
All right, and also we have Richard Honus, who is the prophet of jelly babies.
Yes. Yes, my name's Richard Honus. You may notice from my accent, I'm not from around here. I am one of the founding members of Atheism UK, and I am currently on the board of directors of the Atheist Alliance International. Regular convention goer and passer around of the jelly babies. So we do have a panel that is up here, and we have all been eating babies. So not wanting to perpetuate the stereotype, but
let's perpetuate it.
Oh yeah, let's perpetuate it. Fantastic.
Okay, my name is not Richard.
That's going to get confusing. Do you mind if we call you Richard?
You can. I'm the one with the high voice. My name is Amy Monsky, and I do a few things in the movement. I'm from Charleston, South Carolina. And I started out in my local group, the Secular Humanists of the Lowcountry, which I am now president. And I also run Camp Quest South Carolina, which has been a huge passion of mine. But what is most exciting for me right now is my new job with Atheist Alliance of America as executive director. And I am loving every minute of it here and excited to be here. And I love telling people on the airport, on the airplane, when they ask me what I do, and I get to tell them, I'm a professional atheist.
Amy, I mean, in a movement where people wear an awful lot of hats, you seem to win the hat award. So one of the things we often do in the podcast is we ask people their personal history, deconversion, or lifelong atheist, or somewhere in between. I know you've your history. And I know you have a very good coming out story. I don't know if there's how you would characterize how you became an atheist.
The story of how I became an atheist is really rather boring. I around 17 just started questioning my faith, questioning the existence of God and what it meant to have morality that was based in religion. I was a believer before then. I was raised Catholic, and I'd like to say that I was one of the kids who always saw religion for the bullshit that it was, but I didn't. I believed it all. So the coming out story is really kind of boring, or the losing my faith side of the story is pretty boring. The coming out was a bit more interesting, I guess. Do you want me to tell that?
Yeah, please do.
Okay. So I'm originally from Louisville, Kentucky, and
As is Zion.
That's right. But I went to the better high school.
Our high schools were actually rivalries, we just found out. I went to Male, she went to Manual. She went a few years after I did.
Okay.
Hold on, I'm going to cut you off and tell a funny story while you're telling that story. I'm going to tell your story about the how old you are thing. So we met, and I went out to see her, and we're at dinner. I'm 47, and she told me she was 47. I'm like, what? There's no way you're 47. And so we're eating dinner, and I'm blown away by it. And then at the end, she goes, I'm really only, 35 or whatever she is. And I was like, oh, really? And she goes, yeah, I like to tell people I'm older than I am because they think, wow, you look great for your age. And I think women have done it wrong all this time, lying and saying you're younger. Say you're older. It's great. It's the smartest thing ever happened. Excuse me for interrupting.
Yes, so if anybody asks, I'm 47 today. So I'm originally from Louisville, Kentucky, and I moved to Charleston, South Carolina about 9 years ago. And I didn't know anybody there. My kids were, at the time, my oldest was 5, my youngest was 3, and I was pregnant with my third. And as my oldest started school, everybody at the school talked about their church. And I was a stay-at-home parent, so my entire social circle was at the school, and I didn't want to alienate anybody. This was all I had, so I kept everything to myself, and I was miserable there. So a few years passed, and I had a neighbor move in down the street from me, and she had some kids that rode the bus with me, and we talked, and I realized that I was going to become friends with her. And she was a fundamentalist Christian, and I thought that it was best to go ahead and let her know that I was an atheist, because if there was going to be a problem, I wanted to get it out now before I made an emotional investment in her. So I did, and she told me that she was sad for me, but I let it go, and we were friends for a while, and I was the parent volunteer coordinator at my son's school. And that was very important to me. That was where I got my sense of self outside of being a parent. She and I had a falling out later that year. It was over religion. And about that same time, I had found out about Camp Quest. And my local group, the Secular Humanists of the Low Country, this was before Facebook. So we had an online discussion forum, and in it, which I thought was private, we had to log in, and I had a name that was not my own. And I thought it was private. But in it, I identified myself by name, and that my son, I identified him by name, and I said that we're an atheist, and asked, had anybody heard of Camp Quest? This was in 2009. And that started a discussion which ultimately led to the Secular Humanists of the Low Country inviting me to join their board as a family activities coordinator, and we have a very active family group since that time. So it came out, had a lot of positive come from that. But I thought this was all private. So one day I'm sitting in my living room folding laundry, looking out the window waiting for the bus to come by, and I see this woman that used to be my friend cross the street, open my mailbox, and put something in my mailbox. And I went out to...
Not a Chinese menu.
Say
not a Chinese menu?
No, it was not a Chinese menu. No. And so I went out to get it, and it was 9 pages of printed out that discussion that I had that I thought was private, in which I identified myself as an atheist by name and what I was looking for. with Camp Quest and looking for a community. And there was nothing written by her at all. There was no message from her. So I to this day, I don't really know what she intended to do other than to let me know that she had my information and could out me. And she knew how important my job at the school as a parent volunteer coordinator was. So I got mad and I cried a little bit and I was scared that I was going to lose all the friends and all the social networking I had. And around that time, somebody on the forum had said something along the lines of, it's better to be hated for who you are than loved for who you aren't. And I took that to heart and I thought, can I curse? I thought, I'm not going to let that fucking bitch out me. I'm going to out myself. And at that point, I came out. And as hateful as she was, it was really that fire that she lit under my butt that threw me out. And I am where I am today because of Janelle. So thank you, Janelle.
Nothing makes good neighbors than saying, we know where you live.
Okay, I have a question directed towards our guest Richard Carrier, because that you are a historian and you are sort of proposing the mythicist, the idea that Jesus was a myth. Where does that mean you don't exist? Because this is one of those standard apologetics arguments I always see come up in debates where, the apologist will say it's like, there's not a single historian who doubts the historicity of Jesus.
Right. Yeah, then that's quite false. Actually, there's at least 6 of us who are outed. Let's put it that way. I know there are actually more who won't come out in public and say it. And so the numbers might be even greater. And with my new book on the historicity of Jesus just coming out, published by the University of Sheffield, I think there's going to get a lot more attention in the academic community to seriously considering the hypothesis that, in fact, Christianity began with a revelatory Jesus, like the angel Moroni or angel Gabriel, and then the idea of turning him into a historical person and having him run around Galilee came later, decades later. And that's the thesis that I think actually the evidence does corroborate that, and that's what the position I'll be defending this Saturday. So there are 6 of us. There's 2 sitting professors of religious studies or Christianity who are at least agnostic. Like they'll say, well, I don't know whether Jesus existed or not, and there's not enough evidence to convince me one way or the other. And there's 2 retired professors who have done so, and then 2 other PhDs in the field, me and Robert Price. And so that's 6 that I know by name, and like I said, there's more of us that just haven't come out yet.
Now, do you have much experience with debate prior to this?
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah, I've done lots of different debates, formats, and debating different subjects in philosophy and history and so on.
Since we have the microphone turned over to you, what's your deconversion story, or were you deconverted?
My story is weird compared to most people's stories. I tell the whole thing in my book, Sense and Goodness Without God. So if you want like the whole detail and you want to look it up,
which is a great book, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
I recommend it all the time, honestly.
Give us the Cliff Notes.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, basically, my family was very liberal Christian. So, like, they're liberal Methodist, First Methodist. And it was, we did things like went to Sunday school and stuff like that, but they never required us to believe anything. And they would, like, mix Bible stories along with other myth stories and Greek myths and things like that. And they were just stories to teach you moral lessons and stuff. And so it wasn't really, and my family didn't require me to believe. They didn't put any faith requirements on me. So that was my exposure to Christianity originally, and I had some minor exposure to fundamentalism, just in a humorous way in high school, like the ridiculous things, like my best friend's girlfriend broke into tears when he said that he believed that there could be life on other planets because that was contrary to God or something. It's like, that's a really weird thing to believe. But I was kind of insulated from the political reality of how fundamentalism affects culture and really hurts people's lives and things like that. Then what happened when I was in high school is I actually had a religious experience that converted me to Taoism. And I kind of was convinced that the Tao was real and was guiding me into this thing. And so I did things like meditation. I had altered states of consciousness and had these kinds of mystical experiences. But at the same time, I was a science geek, so I was constantly reading in the sciences. And when I was in the Coast Guard, and this was a very long time ago, when I was in the Coast Guard, I had read enough science to realize that what was happening to me was completely explicable in terms of psychology and biology, right? There's this, and for example, one of the most powerful mystical experiences I had, it came off the end of a 35-hour sequence of shifts, and so I was like massively sleep deprived, and we were like 200 miles from the nearest land in pitch black, midnight, and you're looking up at the most beautiful stars that you could ever see, and then I had this hallucinatory experience. But well, yes, of course you would. So, and at the same time, I was studying more Chinese philosophy and things like that, and started to find things that were wrong with Taoist philosophy. And so I started to realize, okay, this has just been bullshit all this time. And so that left me adrift. I was like, well, then what do I believe? And that's when I started writing Sense and Goodness Without God, or researching it anyway. And like, what is my philosophy of life? What do I believe is real and how the world works and things like that? Rather than just, I don't believe, but what are the things I believe in? But at this point, I wasn't like an atheist, or I didn't call myself an atheist. I still sort of vaguely considered myself a Taoist. But I was on a Navy base getting training, and I was sitting there, and this happens all the time on military bases. Some Navy guy comes up to me and says, "Have you found Jesus?" and it starts the whole script normally that they go through. But I tripped him up because I said, "Oh, I don't need to find Jesus. I'm a Taoist, and even Jesus has to obey the Tao. So I'm following a higher power." And he had no script for that, so it was very confusing for him. But he sort of got back on track and says, "Well, have you read the Bible?" And it's like, "Well, not really. I haven't read the whole thing." And it's like, "Well, how can you make a decision if you haven't read the Bible?" And I was like, "Well, fair point. Okay." And so he says, so you should read the Bible. And to this day, I can't remember if he handed me a Bible or if he told me which Bible to get. But I think he handed me a Bible. He had like an NIV student Bible, and then he just handed it. Says, "Read this." Now,
had he read the Tao Te Ching?
No, of course not. He had no idea what Taoism was. I had to explain it to him, and it was very confusing to him. I could tell. So I took that Bible and went back to my my barracks, and for all the free time that I had, did nothing but read that book from cover to cover, Old Testament to New. And when I finished the whole thing and I turned the last page of the last book of the New Testament, I said aloud to myself, with no one else around in my room, "Yep, I'm an atheist." And then that led me to look for, well, I can't be the only one. Back then I thought I can't possibly be the only one. I felt like I was the only one, the only person who realized that this is bullshit. And so it was really hard to find atheist literature back then. So it took me a while to find in a used avant-garde bookstore, some Bertrand Russell or Corliss Lamont and things like that. And then eventually I was at the Castro Street Fair in San Francisco, and those of you who know what that's about, that's like the greatest fears of the Christian right is the Castro Street Fair. But so I was there, and the American atheists were boothing there, and my friend, who was not an atheist but knew I was, and says, "Oh, look, those are your people," and I was like, "Oh, no shit." And so that was my introduction and first connection to organized atheism.
This might be our first deconversion from Taoism story. So I know Barbara Ehrenreich has a book out about her kind of quasi-mystical experience from a non-theistic perspective. Mm-hmm. Do you have any parallels to that? Do you see that? I don't know if you're familiar with her.
I haven't read it, so I don't know what she describes.
Neither have I, so we'll move on.
That's not useful.
All right, so should we move to introduce Richard Honus and get his...
Okay, well, my story isn't quite as interesting as that.
You're going to tell it with an English accent, so right there, that makes it 10 times more interesting.
As a professor that I met last month said, when you're coming to America, never underestimate having a mediocre level of talent but a British accent. So I'm pretty much a lifelong atheist. I do have some what I describe as residual memories of belief when I was a pre-adolescent. But no, I've never really been a believer. I learnt to question at primary school during a history lesson when we were learning about Richard III and the princes in the Tower. And our teacher said, common wisdom is that Richard III was responsible for the murder of the princes in the Tower. However, there are some historians that doubt that hypothesis. He may have known about it. It may have been done by his minions and not known about it. So, it's a question actually we don't know the answer to. But the common wisdom is this, but there are people that disagree. And that's where I actually learned, so it's okay to question what the mainstream arguments are. And I was only about 10 or 11 when we had that lesson. And with regards to religion, it was never something that really interested me. On the few occasions where I had to go to church, I sat there and spent most of the time thinking, God, when is this going to finish? So that really never came up. I was a member of the Scouts, and for those, I don't know if many people know the history of the Scouting in the UK. They recently accepted secular people and have made amendments to the promise to allow secular people to join, which is great. However, I always interpreted the promise whenever I had to make it. On my honour, I promised to do my best to do my duty to God and to the Queen. I always translated that as God was my own conscience and Queen was to the country, as she is the representative of the nation. So that's how I sort of interpreted that at the time. So
and your duty to God that doesn't exist is no duty at all.
Well, yeah. So as I say,
duty.
It was all about how I interpreted it. But and then I went on and didn't really care. I was somebody that really didn't care about religion. It was nothing that really ever came into my sphere of influence. I was not much of a skeptic either. I remember once when I was at university going onto a college discussion board, someone brought up the first cause argument, and at the time I didn't have a reply to it, and I just didn't care and moved on. 9/11 happened. I saw what happened, and I went, oh, there's religion again, and then just went back to my life. And I remember walking, 2006, I remember walking into my local bookstore. I was picking up some books for an exam I was taking at work, and I saw this book on the shelf, and it was top of the list, and some book I think called The God Delusion. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of that one. and I saw it, and I thought, The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins. Oh, he's the guy that did that documentary last year, which I actually quite agreed with, but again didn't think much of. But I can't really buy that book. If I buy that book, I'm not gonna get my study books, and I'm not going to study, and I'm not going to pass my exam, and I'm not going to get my promotion. Sod it, and I picked the book up. I read it in 3 days flat, and at that point, I became hungry for more. And reading some of the nightmare stories of things that are happening around the world, some of the things that happen in this country, which is why I'm so interested in what happens, because I actually care about people. And I have now so many friends in this country, and I again hear the nightmare stories. I don't know if we're going to be talking about it later, but one of the speakers at this conference is now not able to come. So hopefully we will talk about that later. But I will say, I'm Horace Gilgamesh.
I'm Horace Gilgamesh.
I'm Horace Gilgamesh.
I am Horace Gilgamesh.
I'm actually speaking in his time slot. I'm going to have a shirt that says I am not.
You atheist.
And the fact that one member of this panel still has to go by a pseudonym, that shouldn't be the case. You shouldn't have to do that. And that's one of the reasons why I then got involved, because I didn't realise the scale of abuse and negativity, and the fact that, say in 13 countries in the world, if you deconvert, you can be executed for deconverting. That's disgraceful. And so that's why I then started getting involved. I got involved with local groups in the UK. I helped found a group in the UK, a national group in Atheism UK, which is you can access at www.atheismuk.com. We have a thriving forum. Please come along and join in. And I got involved with the Atheist Alliance International, which is where I started coming to these conventions. My first one in 2009, and I've been coming ever since. And wanting to help out, and here I am.
And he's quite the singer.
Well, I also belong to a theatre company, a musical theatre company back in the UK as well, on top of other things. Karaoke night tonight. come along.
We might get a sample later, hopefully. But, so we've gone from the historicity of Jesus to the historicity of Shakespeare in this panel. So we're really keeping
Richard
it,
Richard III and the murder of the princes in the Tower. Actually.
Oh, well, that's true. I'm sorry. Yes. I'm sorry. Yeah. See, I'm terrible with Shakespeare.
Shakespeare was not murdered in the Tower.
That we know.
That we know. It was the lizard people. We should move on to Brother Richard Haynes. I hear you have quite the deconversion story, maybe the one to end all deconversion stories.
Well, much like Steve Martin in The Jerk, I was born a poor black child. If anyone's old enough to remember that movie.
That's all I need.
I actually was born, for the most part, an atheist. I didn't like religion as a kid. My family was not religious. My mother came from Catholic stock, and my father was Baptist, which meant we didn't go to church at all, except every once in a while, maybe on a midnight mass, we'd go with the Catholics and Easter sunrise service with the Baptists. But I always thought it was ridiculous. I, too, loved science fiction, huge fan of Carl Sagan. Cosmos was the closest thing to a religious experience that I had as a child, and just devoured all things science. But I had a really rough childhood. As I said, my mom's family was Catholic, and they are the perfect living stereotype of Irish Catholics. They're all major alcoholics. And so it was a pretty rough childhood. I ended up running away from home when I was 15. What I needed was some medication, but a couple failed suicide attempts and sleeping on top of Burger Kings for the heat that comes out of the systems. But, as you travel around and you're meeting people, no one gives you a sandwich or a little chicken sandwich unless they tell you about Jesus. So I actually listened to these people, and regardless of thinking religious was bullshit, or all religion was bullshit, and that, I was much too intelligent for this stuff, I was so desperate and so needy that I was able to create this little God box in my head to where I could allow no reason into. And I accepted Jesus and was born again. And much like Dr. Carrier has said, it was a very real experience. I understand psychologically the reasons now, but it did change my life. And I probably would be dead if it wasn't for my experiences. I immediately became somewhat of an evangelist. I'm one of those guys who would pass out tracts while you're trying to go to the movie to tell you about Jesus. I once picked up a guy for hitchhiking from Romania, and he lived with me for 3 years. He was in my wedding. I mean, I really walked the walk, went to seminary, ended up becoming an associate minister in the country's first megachurch in Atlanta, Georgia, before it was crumbled in sex scandals and money scandals. Big surprise. But my wife kind of jokes me, if you look at old videos of Pat Robertson or Jim Baker or Jimmy Swaggart, or Roberts, I'm always somewhere in the background, like Forrest Gump saying, I got to go pee, But I experienced all of that stuff. I was a fundamentalist, but Carl Sagan was still the man, and I still believed in evolution. I just thought we didn't understand the Bible. I thought there was billions of years between verse 1 and verse 2 of Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and then the earth was formless and void. What happened between those two? All this BS stuff.
Were you vocal about this at the time?
Yes, I was. And I thought it was my mission to change the church from the inside, to wake them up to the glory of Carl Sagan.
How'd that turn out?
It was okay, the circles that I hung in the most. There's a lot more acceptance of reality behind the scenes than there's said from the pulpit many times. And I was actually, as I was becoming, we just had a daughter, my wife and I. She was 2 weeks old. I started being, to use a Christian word, very convicted. I knew there was a lot of money mismanagement and different things going on. Even though I wasn't participating in it, I knew that if I continued to sit on the stage or to be a part of that place, that I was just as guilty as these people were. So we left the church. And it was very difficult. Like I said, we had a 2-week-old baby. We moved into the basement apartment of someone. I started getting death threats from people in the church because I knew things that actually didn't come out till just a few years ago. Sally Jesse Raphael had a show with people from my church. I didn't want anything to do with it. Larry King, one of my fellow pastors, was on Larry King. I just went into hiding. But I was still a believer. And I was going to, find the way, and I was going to improve the church. So then one day, I decided to do that. I needed to know what the controversy was, and I started getting every creationist book I could find. And I started reading them, and I was blown away. We know this now, but I was blown away that there was no argument, that there was no theory of creationism. It was so bad it wasn't even wrong. It couldn't be falsifiable. But there's one, and I need to find who this author was, but it's a huge book. He went through all this to explain, Noah's Ark, all this ridiculous stuff. And at the end of the book, he said, if you've read all of this, and you are a, what do you call it? If you are a theistic evolutionist, which is what I was, you can't be, and here's why. And this sounds ridiculous. If someone knows theology, you'll know the principle about the first Adam and the second Adam. Or is anyone familiar with that? It sounds ridiculous, but the Bible is very clear that Jesus was the second Adam, and he came to restore the damage done by the first Adam. And what is that? I mean, there's no theology who won't tell you that sin came into the world through Adam. Death came into the world through Adam. All of that happened because of Adam. Therefore, if a little caterpillar or a little ant died before Adam sinned, then death didn't come from Adam. So you can't say that Jesus restored what Adam did if there was death before the sin. And the guy was right. And I closed the book and said, man, I don't believe in God anymore.
So,
because Carl Sagan won, it basically is what I'm saying.
So would you say that your God box got the red ring of death?
Yes, it did. Xbox reference there. But it blew me away. Of course, I wouldn't call myself an atheist because you guys are a bunch of godless heathens. And, I didn't like the word, and that's a whole other story. But it was a very interesting experience.
Well, we still have a couple of babies left if you want to eat. Not many, no. Yeah.
Oh, I'll have a baby. I'd like to eat a baby.
Live on air,
Babies
folks.
are delicious.
Take this baby, may it serve you well.
Get in my belly.
Eating babies is an English tradition.
So we probably should move on. Our previous podcast guest was Horace Gilgamesh, who was slated to be at this conference and has decided to back out because of some very specific threats. Does anybody have a sense of what we can talk about?
So a few days ago, Horace received a letter in the mail to his private address. And it was an especially creepy letter because it identified him as his real name. And clearly it had his address that was not associated with his book, The Awkward Moments, not found in your average children's Bible. And he received lots of threats, but most of them have been via Facebook or email, and they've been to his Awkward Moments and Horace Gilgamesh account. So this one was a little different. This person had clearly done his homework, and so he took this one a lot more seriously than he would have some of the others. And he contacted the police department and contacted us, and we in turn contacted the hotel security and began looking into personal security. And it seemed like everything was okay, but then he received another letter the next day, and then a third letter the next day, and it was after a lot of hard thought on his part, and he was very disappointed, and of course we're very sad to not have him because he's amazing. He decided that it's in his best interest to not come tomorrow, and his wife's interest as well. I think she was especially worried about him. So that's generally where things stand right now.
I don't have a joke to end that one with.
Well, I was just going to say, I noticed that almost everyone in the room, in solidarity, it has been decided what we're going to do in solidarity is each of us has got a name tag. Hello, I'm Horace Gilgamesh, hence the reference that we made earlier. So that we actually stand by Horace. We have to respect his decision. It's not worth putting yourself in danger. But as I said earlier, it's absolutely disgraceful that this is what people have to put up with. And I think that's why we need to be doing what we do, why we need to have the organisations that we have, and why we need to be active. I know that's not a funny thing or particularly entertaining, but I think it's a message that we really do need to get out there.
Amy, can I ask, is it true that my wife called you and suggested that I take his time slot? Is that,
I can't answer that, sorry. If you can offer me more than she did, I'll think about it.
Well,
you may think that, but I couldn't possibly comment.
All right, so I'd like to maybe direct the discussion to Amy, since you are just you've recently taken over as executive director. I was wondering, like, what are the changes you've made, or what are the efforts you've made to help the organization?
All right. So the first thing that we did was the new edition of our Secular Nation magazine, which, if you haven't seen a copy yet, check it out. It's, I think, if I can say so myself, I think it's beautiful. Mm-hmm. And you'll notice the cover art is the cover of Horace Gilgamesh's second volume of his Awkward Moments Not Found in the Children's Bible. And in it is an interview done by Secular Nation Podcast with Horace. So, and actually we have his second volume here for sale down in our bookstore. It's the first time that it's been available to anybody, so we have first dibs on that.
And since we're all Horace Gilgamesh, we can get a signed copy of our own.
That's right. That's right.
Roses.
So the first thing that we did was kind of revamping the Secular Nation magazine and moving forward with that. And I'm really excited about the changes that have been made and the changes that will continue to be made in the future. The other thing was working on this convention. And I'd like to say again, I've said it a couple of times, but I really want to thank Seattle Atheists and Erica in particular. They have been amazing.
Okay, I think we can open the room up for questions.
Can I, as you're getting set up for that, do something real quick? I still have some supernatural abilities. I just want to let you know that I can channel people from the past, and I'm going to call upon Red Fox. I can summon him from the grave if you would like to hear from him for a second. Oh, Red, come up here and say something. I'm putting you on the spot.
Okay.
He would say, if you let yourself get nailed to death and then you come back 3 days later, I don't owe you shit.
Thank you very much. Travis Simmons.
Put you on the spot. Thanks, man.
All right, so if there are any questions in the audience for our panelists.
This is for Richard. You mentioned the debates.
Which?
Oh, my bad. Richard Carrier. Sorry.
Yeah.
You talked about the debates that you've done in the past, and I've watched some debates, William Lane Craig, that sort of thing. And one of the topics that's been going around a little bit is how to prepare for debating someone. I mean, in the case of William Lane Craig, he's kind of a professional, so he's really good at it.
Oh, yeah.
How important is that? I mean, you're kind of back in the right horse, which certainly helps. Any techniques you recommend? Preparation? How important is that?
I can teach you some of the dark arts. The dark arts can be used for good or evil. This is true. So there's, you have to know your material. That's kind of important. And it helps, obviously, if you know your opponent's arguments, so that you can save a lot of time if you know what arguments they're not going to make. But the biggest advice that I can give you is to learn about drops and pickups. And this is a debating tactic. When you make a case, you make an argument, and they do a rebuttal, but they forget to rebut certain parts of your argument. Those are called drops. They dropped them. And so you should remind the audience that they dropped them if you have the opportunity. So that reminds the audience that, because if that doesn't happen, it's very easy. In fact, it's a common cognitive delusion that everybody is subject to, that you think all the arguments were rebutted when they finish their argument, right? So you have to remind the audience that didn't happen, because it's just like a magician's trick, right? Like if the attention isn't called to it, it's easy to forget that's happened, especially if you're biased in favor of your opponent, or if the audience member is biased in favor of your opponent. It's very easy for them to not notice that he missed stuff or she missed stuff if you're debating a woman. Pickups are cases like they might rebut certain things you said, and you just have to remember. You have to come up with a really easy way to have a notation that you can quickly note down, so that you remember which arguments you need to pick up, so that you don't drop anything. And so the ultimate objective of a debate is to not have dropped anything, to have picked everything up by the end of the debate. And if you have the truth on your side, then technically you should win the debate. The problem is that it's very easy for the clock to run out before you can get to all the arguments that you need to get to. And that's the biggest limitation of a debate, is figuring out how to make your arguments very quickly and succinctly within the clock time. And that's a big challenge if you care about the truth, because the truth is complicated, right? You want to have nuances and qualifications and explanations and stuff, and you can't do that. And sometimes, like, the audience might not understand a certain concept that you have to, like, educate the audience while you're trying to win the debate at the same time. And that's the most difficult part, is trying to get to do that, to keep everything picked up by the end of the debate within a very short clock time, without distorting the truth. So it's a big challenge, and that really the only recommendation I can have is just to do it a lot, and then so you learn from your mistakes and your failures, and then you figure out how to do it better. And experience is really helpful in that.
Can I ask a debate follow-up question?
Yeah.
I know a common tactic, and I'd like to get some advice from you on this, is your opponent will throw out, say, 10 arguments, and you don't have the time to respond to them all.
It's called shotgunning.
Shotgunning, that's what it is. And you respond to 2, and then at the end of the debate, well, he didn't respond to this, this, and this, therefore he loses.
Yeah.
How do you handle that?
Well, I mean, obviously, if you have any time left, then oftentimes you might not. You might not be the last one speaking. You can simply point out that you just didn't have enough time, and that it's actually disingenuous of them to claim that they win the debate simply because the clock ran out. The truth is not decided by a clock. But if you don't have that opportunity to do it in the debate, you can do it in post-debate analysis and point that out. But you're right; it's a very common tactic. It's also called spreading. Is another one. Is where you just throw out a zillion arguments. Or a zillion claims. They don't even have to be arguments. They're just assertions oftentimes. And there's just no way to rebut every one of them in time. And William Lane Craig does this a lot, where he'll throw out a zillion assertions. He'll claim that some particular author wrote some particular thing in some particular obscure article, which of course you can't stop the debate and go check and see, oh, you know what, it doesn't actually say that, for example. So it's very easy, if you're not very honest, and if you don't care so much about the truth, to make it look like you've won the debate by simply throwing out a billion assertions, a lot of which are questionable or false or very dubious indeed, but your opponent doesn't have time to explain that to the audience, and the audience doesn't know, right? The audience isn't, reading this literature. They don't know what the truth is. So, yeah, that's a problematic tactic, and that is the biggest problem that you face in a debate if you're up against an opponent who's a little shifty, which a lot of Christian apologists are.
Bobby Kirkhart?
I'd like to ask all of the panel, really, but especially Richard, because you've done so many debates. Richard, Dr. Richard, Dr. Dick. If your debate at this conference is about whether the history really substantiates more likely Jesus did or did not exist as a human being, right, let alone a God. But and that's something that many atheists are undecided about, and a few liberal Christians. Mm-hmm. Most often, the debates we do, and I think you've done some, are the variations on the "Is there a God?"
Yeah.
People tend to come into those, audiences tend to come into those with their minds made up, I think. Is it your opinion that that kind of debate changes anybody's mind? And if not, if so, how? And if not, is there value in it, and what would be the value? And I don't want to limit the answers to Dr. Dick.
Yeah, I do have something to say on that. I would love to see a proper scientific study of that question, so I can answer it based on anecdotal evidence that I know about. I've met many people who are atheists, who just became atheists years after they saw me do a debate. And they'll credit my debate for starting them on their path. And what's going to happen is they're not going to convert to atheism in the debate. Like, the end of the debate, they'll still say, "Oh yeah, the Christian won," or whatever. But if I've done my job, and this is one thing that I've talked about, this is another answering your question about how what's the best way to use debates, is you want to educate the audience and convey information to them that they won't have heard before. And a lot of it will be startling or shocking, and some of them will just run away from it. Some of it will double down and deny it, but others will be disturbed by it, and then they'll go, is that really true? And then they'll go and start checking these things, and they'll find out it's true. And then that will lead to more things. And so it can lead to this snowball effect. So you can actually be one of the causal factors that leads someone towards atheism and humanism. So I think debates are useful in that sense. And it's more of you get maybe 1,000 or 500 people in a room. You might get 10% of them would never have gone on that path had they not sat in that debate. So I do think those debates are useful in that respect.
I agree 100%. A lot of people had a big problem with when Bill Nye debated Ken Ham. I actually had a really heated debate with Dawkins about this because he was definitely against it. And while I agree that legitimate scientists like Dawkins should never debate these people, I think public figures like Bill Nye definitely do, and I think that it was a great debate. And I know for a fact that he opened up some people's minds, not to leave Christianity, but the validity of Scripture and how to treat it. And I think we need to do more of those things because, for the most part, people have had experiences like Daniel Dennett said. People don't know what they don't know what they believe. They believe what they know, or they believe in belief. They're just taught that way. And most people are open-minded, and even if that little seed of doubt can get there, it can have great results.
Though I'm not a panel member, I don't even play one on TV. This goes down to the basic psychology of decision making and the like, and some of the research by Daniel Kahneman and others is very instructive on how you get people to change minds when those minds are set, and really actively out to look for evidence for their preferred beliefs. But it seems like with debates, it's not necessarily the quality of the argument, though it needs to be a good quality argument, but to be up there as an example, like Bill Nye, I mean, who can dislike the guy? So in a way, it's almost like just getting up there and being firm and being okay with being an atheist in public is a massive part of that.
Okay, any more questions not directed at Richard Carrier? Just because we got two more Richards and an Amy to choose from. So, all right. Yes.
Well, I just wanted to make a comment. I just saw a debate in 2009, Intelligence Squared, with Christopher Hitchens and Stephen Fry. And they took...
yeah, that's one of the best.
And a bishop from Africa and a woman member of parliament. And they took a survey at the beginning of this debate of how many people... The question was, is the Catholic Church a force for good in the world? And that was the debate topic. And they took a survey at the beginning and at the end, and I was amazed at how many people changed their mind.
Yeah, it was astonishing. I've never seen that. I've seen a lot of debates where they do that, where they poll the audience before and after, and you get like virtually no shift. When I saw the votes come up at the end of that debate, I was like, no way, I've never seen that. It was like one of the most sweeping effects I've ever seen. And it was funny because it was Stephen Fry and Hitchens are just so fantastically witty that they just annihilated the other side. The other side was just really ill-prepared to defend. I mean, they came across as terrible. They had no good points, and Fry and Hitchens had like really zingers that really got the audience going. So I can only explain that as their charisma and brilliance just worked and really affected the audience.
It was in London.
Yeah.
And
That's true.
In fact, actually, yeah. But not only that, I mean, the argument, it wasn't just the personalities, but it was the arguments as well. I mean, Anne Widdecombe, who was she's now no longer a member of Parliament, she is somebody who I personally have disagreed with on almost every single thing that she says, bar one. But I'm not going to go into the detail about what that one thing is. But I'd always rated her as a debater. I used to watch her on television, and I always used to think I would hate to come up against her because she was such a force of nature. Well, nature? No. She was such an incredible political mover. And she was just basically destroyed. The incredulity that she came... that she came up with, he said, why are you bringing up the discrimination against gays? Why are you bringing up the covering up of the paedophiles? Wasn't that the point of the debate?
Yeah, I know. It was astonishing.
And the argument from the bishop was, well, the Catholic Church has to be a force for good in the world because I've dedicated my life to it, and if it's not a force for good in the world, I will have wasted my life. My Lord Bishop, you have wasted your life.
Okay. I've got a question for Amy. You said that you decided to out yourself before your former friend outed you. You never said what happened when you did that. Did you lose your friends in your community, or was it better than you thought it would be?
Ultimately, it was better than what I thought it would be. I had already lost that friend, and truly she was not a friend to begin with. Mm-hmm. The people in my son's school, it took a long time to completely out myself to them. Mm-hmm. But what happened is my social circle opened up, and I found a lot of new friends in the humanist community there and the atheist community there in Charleston. So there were a few people that it was me that distanced myself from them more than they from me. But it was really for the best. I have a bigger social circle now than I have in the rest of the years of my life put together. It's been an amazing, and I love finding my people. Okay, so it's been great.
Did you lose your job though as coordinator for the school?
I did not do it the next year, but it had nothing to do with that. I thought that we were going to move away. Because I hated Charleston, because I had no friends. I had no real friends that I could be myself. Every conversation I had with anybody, especially with mothers or parents of boys, and where Boy Scouts were an issue, I felt like I always had to stay one step ahead of the conversation to avoid Boy Scouts coming up or to avoid church, and it was exhausting. So I had intended to move away. So I voluntarily did not choose to volunteer again.
Okay, thank you.
Here we have Sam Mulvey from the Ask an Atheist podcast.
Oh, and I was going to introduce myself as Horace Gilgamesh. So my question is actually for Brother Richard, and I hate to ask undifferentiated questions, but when you talked about, sort of the realities of what people in the megachurch said believe versus what they do for the good of the cause, and if I read that in an online interview, I would have broken my mouse clicking on that for more information. It's like, what? I want to know more about this. Can you describe sort of what that cognitive dissonance was like?
Wow. There's a lot of the ends justify the means that go on. I don't know if I'm specifically answering what you're saying, but I know in my church, this is in 85, 88, something like that. We had a budget of $250,000 a week was our budget. And it wasn't like many of the televangelists to get somebody rich or to do, somebody didn't get paid these astronomical salaries. But it was to feed the beast. It was to get bigger churches. It was to be on more television channels. It was just to grow the machine. So there was a lot of, we're kind of being dishonest here, but it has a good result. So we'll emphasize maybe, feed what do you call it? The bread to the masses, or cake, or I forgot what the quote is.
Bread and circuses.
Yes, it was very much a lot of like that, and before offerings. I mean, we were in a good way. It was in Atlanta, and we had our congregation was 50% white, 50% black. One of the first times this ever happened, and it was a great experience. But we had a lot of really poor single mothers who were on food stamps, and the way that we went about getting money from them, not just tithes, but beyond that, because tithes is the minimum of what you're supposed to do as a believer. The more faith you have, the more you give, And so that is the beginning of it. Am I even going close to what you're trying to say, or you're talking about, what were you asking? Ask me again, I'm sorry.
That's definitely part of it, is, how do people interface with crowds, but with the flock, I suppose. But you were specifically talking about like the creationism story.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Is there a lot of like, no, we kind of get science, but for the purposes of et cetera?
Well, I think even that's true with some of the theological positions that don't really make a lot of sense. There's a lot of there's a couple principles in the Bible, like you don't let your good be evil spoken of, or you can't cause your brother to stumble. And so we might be good enough for some of this knowledge, but to share it with someone else, they just can't handle it. Yeah, and it's just going to cause them to sin. And that's why, if you were a preacher, you didn't drink in public. You didn't want somebody to see you going into an R-rated movie because that might cause somebody to stumble. That's why you sneak in your mistress's back doors. But it was a lot of that, and with science things and with morality in general. There was a lot of justifications for moral actions. The church I was a part of had this. It was a part of the Kingdom of God movement, the Kingdom movement, and they had a lot of these kingdom relationships. The only reason God has us get married is because He can't trust us. But the Bible says that in the Kingdom of God there will be no marriage. So to become one in spirit with somebody, that's more important. So if the woman who's writing your biography, the only way you can really get unity with her is to sleep with her, because that would help. Of course, I'm a young guy. I'm having demons of masturbation cast out of me, which is a whole another problem. And I'm living with the morals of 70-year-old men, while the 70-year-old men are having orgies and stuff. You find out years later. That's worse than almost any of the experiences I have. I missed a lot of fun. But yeah, it's just that we have to protect the little people attitude, and it's pretty sad. Ask me about the demon of masturbation story later. I'll tell you. It's pretty funny.
Now, okay, we've been talking about debate, and I think one of the recent things was Matt Dillhunty debating Cy Ten Bruggencate, and that's kind of become like a certain thing of just like, we don't need to do this anymore. So I sort of wanted just to steer the conversation back into the subject of debate. Is it sometimes, I wouldn't say detrimental, but just sort of not worth doing?
Well, Cy comes from a particular theology that is a waste to debate them. I mean, his principle is, the Bible says that everyone knows in their heart there is a God, And so you have all these arguments, but there is a God. You just want to sin. So it doesn't matter what you say. There's a God, because the Bible says so. And the only reason you won't accept it is because you want to live a life of sin. So therefore, you're wrong. And also, I won't debate Scripture with you because I only talk Scripture with fellow believers, so I won't talk about that with you, is what he did to Matt. And then you also had the fool says in his heart, there's no God. But he twisted these things around. If the Bible says if you really know God, that you can't change from it, so were you really a believer? Mm-hmm. And you say, well, yes, I was. But you don't now, so according to the Bible, you're not. So there's no way you can debate that.
Mm-hmm. But you could be a brain in a vat.
Yes. That was a horrible thing, too. It's like, can you prove to me you're not a brain in a vat somewhere? Matt would have to say, no, I don't think we are, but I can't prove it. Well, therefore, why should I listen to you? It's ridiculous.
Well, and I'd like to add something to the debate topic, too, is Bobby had asked if, any good could come of this. And there are lots of debates. When we think of debates, we think of more formal debates. But there are lots of other opportunities for people that aren't formal debaters to get out. And one of the other people in the movement talked about his experience with JWs and Mormons coming to the door, and how does he handle that. And what he said, I thought was a great idea, and nobody has come to my door yet, unfortunately, but I'm going to do this too. And that is, he would only speak to the other person if they brought their children with them. So he would only speak to them if he had their audience of their captive children. And so I think that to speak to debates, whether they're formal debates or informal conversations, is that really there's a lot a lot of seeds that can be planted, especially to the bystanders that are listening, to both sides, and things can change later on. And also to the more casual conversations, it puts faces to the label of atheist and humanist, and people become more familiar with that, and I think are then therefore more accepting of the ideas that come out.
Okay. Yeah, that's all spot on, and it reminds me to point out that when you're debating someone, this is one of the things, like, I generally will not debate someone in private, like if they're emailing me or stuff. It's got to be in public where a lot of people are seeing, because I don't really probably have no chance of changing their mind. But the debate is going to not only change some minds that look at it, but it's also going to inoculate a lot of people, because a lot of people might be on the fence or might not have heard these Christian arguments. But if they're immediately, these Christian arguments are presented with the responses, and like that's the only way they first see them, then they're diffused. They have no power at that point. So that's one of the advantages of debating, is you're not so much trying to convince your opponent to change his mind. You're educating. You're using that as an opportunity to educate the audience, and you want as big an audience as possible. That's the way to go for that.
And I would say it's the topics are really important. Like Bobby said earlier, let's quit doing this "Does God exist?" debate, because that one you can't win. You can say, "Did Jesus exist?" You can say, "Does a theistic God exist?" Because that's something that can be measurable. If something outside of space and time reaches into our realm, it's going to leave a fingerprint and some DNA evidence or something, that we could multiverse. Yeah, there's things we can do, but when we get these generic topics and there's no way to win them, that's a waste of time.
I just wanted to comment more than a question, just kind of to back up what Dr. Carrier and other of you were just saying. I was a Liberty University graduate, actually, and I was the type who really did benefit from watching those debates, because I wasn't an emotional believer. I wasn't really have a lot of emotional ties to my faith. It was really purely an intellectual discourse for me, and so watching those debates really helped me to unravel my thoughts. And so I just wanted to kind of offer my testimony as support for why I think you guys should do those debates. So
one of the things I do when I give talks at certainly at colleges, after reading Greta Christina's book "Why Are You Atheists So Angry," she talks about how many people, going to meetings, and I now start doing this, how many people in this room are ex-believers. Okay. How many of you, as part of your deconversion, were influenced by a debate or a conversation or a blog post? Influenced, not necessarily deconverted all the way, but influenced. Yeah, or a book. Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, a lot of people put their hands up, and I have to say, and then you ask the question, how many of you were deconverted on the spot? No one puts their hands up.
Yeah.
So, the expectation, you've got to really be prepared with it to manage your expectations of what you're going to achieve. So I do talk to people. I'm not so much a formal debater. I'm personally not a fan of going to formal debates, because you have to listen to the same arguments time and time and time again.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I'm now bored with that. But of course, there are other people that haven't heard them.
Yeah.
And every time someone comes back to me with Pascal's wager, I'm physically holding myself back. But you do have to do it. It's part of what we have to do, because it's the only way we're going to get people's minds changed, is to plant that seed.
That's really difficult, and I'm glad you said that, because I talked to Matt Dillahunty about this. He does his television show, and it is the same arguments over and over again. And sometimes he gets a little heated. It's pretty funny to watch. But I have to constantly remind myself some of these things that people are talking about, this is the first time they've ever heard it. And it's really hard not to say, "Oh, you're such an idiot." But you have to, because it is. I mean, like the idea to me that a God that something had to exist, the whole, first cause thing, never even crossed my mind until much later, even when I didn't believe in the Christian God necessarily. That concept, it was brand new to me.
And one of the things that, the one that frustrates me now the most is, and they keep throwing about, well, what about faith? Isn't that good enough? Automatically assuming that faith, depending on how you define faith, because you then have to go into that conversation, believing something for which you do not have evidence for, or believing something that the evidence actually goes contrary, or my favourite one, pretending to know things that you don't know. I love that. Citing Peter Boghossian there, must cite our sources. And they have this beatific look on their face when they say it, as if it was an axiom. Faith is a good thing. No, it's not. In fact, that's the problem.
Yeah.
Amy, did those little flyers, were they in the packets for people, do you know?
Yeah, they were in the bags, but a lot of the bags didn't get passed out today. So if you did not get a bag, please stop by the front check-in table and get a bag. Because Richard,
a few years ago, right before the Region Rally, I created, Christians give you little tracts. I created a couple that you can give the people if they knock on your door. One's called What's Wrong with Faith, and the other one's a brief sermon on the scientific methods.
I'm going to do a quick plug here as well. If you go onto the Atheism UK website, we have a number of leaflets, tracts that you can actually download, print out, and one of them is actually called Faith, the Invalid Argument. And I'm definitely going to plug that because I wrote it.
And if we have any good cartoonists, we need a good Jack Chick on our side.
Oh, yeah. I used to collect those things. I loved them.
Yeah. Again, me and Richard, we decided we would end with a song.
Yeah.
Immanuel Kant was a real pissant who was very rarely stable. Heidegger was boozy beggar, drink you under the table. David, you could consume Schopenhauer and Hegel. And Wittgenstein was very twice as sloth as Schlegel. There's nothing Nietzsche couldn't teach about the raising of the wrist.
If you know it.
Socrates himself was permanently pissed. Oh, John Hobbes' free will and high-pointed was particularly ill. Play the they say could throw it away. Half-white Randy, and every day, like a soul was a bug of rose bottle. Hobbes was fond of his dram, and Rene Descartes was drunk in thought. I drink, therefore I am.
Yes,
Socrates himself was particularly missed. A lovely little figure, but a bugger when he's pissed. All right, thank you very much. I'd like to thank our panelists, Richard Carrier, Dr. Richard Carrier, Brother Richard Haynes, Richard Honus.
Yeah, no titles.
Master of the Jelly Babies.
Are there any left?
Amy Monsky. I, again, am Tim Brennan, and my co-host, Michael X. Secular Nation Podcast, the official podcast of the Atheist Alliance of America. All rights reserved. Void where prohibited.
Available for weddings, funerals, and bar mitzvahs.
Thank you very much.